So have you ever booked a trip that has a connecting flight and you're a little bit nervous about the time in between the two flights? Well, in this week's video, we're gonna share a couple tips on how you can make sure that you hit that connecting flight. And just in case you miss that connection flight, we'll walk you through a step-by-step process and what you need to know about getting on your next flight. So without further ado, let's cue that intro.
What's up YouTube? Trevi from the Adventure Buddies, the modern travel family, bringing you another video filled with tips, tricks, and inspiration to make sure you maximize your next family adventure, like we always do here at the Adventure Buddies.
So first things first, you wanna make sure that you try and maximize your time at your destination and minimize your time during travel. That's often the times why we try and go direct flights. But if you can't, you do wanna make sure that the layover in between flights is not too long because you'll get bored in the airport, but not too short because you're gonna get stressed out trying to run from flight to flight. So a general rule of thumb is trying to book connection flights that have a 2-hour difference in between. That gives you enough time in case you do have some small subtle delays on your flight. Plus, it does give you the opportunity to go to the restroom, grab a snack, etc., and be to your next destination stress-free. Our second tip when knowing you have that tight connection is making sure that you try and sit towards the front of the plane. This should be self-explanatory, but those in the front oftentimes get off first, so that gives you the most opportune time to run out of that airplane and run to your next terminal destination. So speaking of running, that brings us to tip number 3. Make sure that you know and understand where your next gate is relative to where you're landing. This is going to allow you to plan the most optimal route to get from point A to point B. Well, Matt, how do you figure this out? Well, twofold. One, you can see on your maps just through your phones and download that offline if you're worried about internet. And two, ask your flight attendant. Oftentimes they have a well-versed knowledge of that airport and they can pull where that flight that you're going out of is leaving from. So speaking of flight attendants, that brings us to tip number 4. So when all else fails, try talking to the flight attendant on your current flight. Let them know that you have that connecting flight, you're worried about time, and see what they can do. Sometimes they can even pick up the phone and they can let the other gate agent know that you are on the way and that they are willing to hold the flight just a little bit longer to make sure you can get from point A to point B. Now, however, this typically only works if there is a small window in between the time you're landing and or getting there. And so if you're well delayed, that's not gonna happen, but make sure you try, because what's the worst that could happen? They'll just tell you no, they can't do anything. So again, try asking your flight attendants because they can help you out more than you think. And then finally, that brings us to tip number 5. Run. So make sure you get from point A to point B as fast as possible. So we've all been there before, so don't worry about other people judging or laughing or pointing at you because we've all been there once before. So if you are traveling with a family, maybe designate 1 or 2 people to go on ahead while the others carry on luggage to the final destination, and hopefully they can hold that plane for you. So when all else fails, run. So there are a couple tips on how you can manage the short layovers. And so let's talk about the inevitable, you miss your connecting flight. What do you do? So let's get into that right now. So if you do miss that connecting flight, there's 2 scenarios we're gonna talk through and how you're gonna be able to approach that. So the first scenario is that if you booked with airline A and your next flight is with the same exact airline, then you have no worries. So they're just gonna be able to put you on the next available flight free of charge and off you go. So worst case scenario, you're just gonna have to wait until that next flight comes, which hopefully isn't too long. So then that brings us to scenario 2. This is typically where we fall into when booking connecting flights, is that you book with 2 separate airlines. So why do we do that? Well, that's oftentimes how we get cheaper flights. But what is the risk when booking with 2 separate airlines? Well, that inherent risk is that if one airline is late, the other airline has no obligation to get you onto their next flight. So what that means is you're going to have to book a completely different ticket, full price more than likely, to get onto a flight to your final destination. So we urge you a lot of caution when booking with 2 separate airlines and having that connecting flight that may be a little bit tight. So there you guys have it, a few tips on what to do with your tight connecting flights and what you should do if you missed that connection flight. And so if you like this video, please consider giving us that big thumbs up. Comment down below if you've ever missed a flight. And most importantly, while you're at it, hit that red subscribe button for more travel tips and adventures. And most importantly, remember, life's an adventure. Who are you going on with?